very humble, but one thing I believe is that productivity is down. I don't believe that working 100% from home it does affect innovation. It does affect attachment to colleagues. You're more becoming a single employee working on your own, giving away your talent to a company, but then on the long-term attachment and culture to company, you lose more people than you might lose short-term by giving hard formal rules in terms of how many days you want people to be at work so they're together. So I'm not that confident about 100%. It's more flexible, but more at work.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Then I guess maybe are tenants looking for anything different right now? Or maybe Neil, I'll start this question off with you. Has IW changed anything kind of in their spaces based on what tenants are asking for, or you're seeing changes in the market of demand?
Well, look, maybe just to pick up the end of the last question, because just to maybe give a broader perspective, because just given the footprint we've got, I think we maybe have a broader view. I mean, I certainly agree with. There's been a shift in terms of the employee having more voice, the end user as opposed to the customer. Because we contract possibly with a company, but the end user is more of a say. And there's two things driving that. One is, they've had a lot of time back because they haven't had the commute because they've been at home. It doesn't matter how far the commute is. If you're going up and down stairs, it's closer than even the 15-minute city solution. And as importantly, they've had a lot of, and that's given family time back. They've also had a lot of cash back in their pockets because you're not spending huge amounts of money to commute. It doesn't matter what form of commute, and there's a sort of lifestyle benefit because you're not crammed in some commuter public transport, which really isn't pleasant. However you do it. So I think those things have driven that shift that Freddie pointed out to. And I agree, but I agree with what François made about culture, because we're seeing that there is a challenge now because there's been longevity. There's been whole generations of employees. My son's one who left university last year, never physically met their colleagues, and that's quite difficult to onboard into a new organisation. How do you stamp that cultural identity? So there are aspects of that. But what's driving it from our, it's really convenience. It's a convenience thing, no different from what we've seen in retail as we went from hypermarkets to supermarkets to convenience stores. It's the same thing is now happening. It's behind the 15-minute city. So I think the convenience factor, sustainability is a play on the younger generation. So it is a greener solution. If you're not commuting, you're saving all the carbon that's being produced. That's becoming a factor for employees and employers. But I would equally note that there's very big differences globally as to why people may want. We've seen in some emerging markets that we operate in, people want to go to the office because they live in very small apartments. They're not air conditioned. They don't have the space to work in a conducive fashion. They actually want to get back into an office because it's air conditioned. It's more space. There's F&B options around that are so. There's a whole range of different things driving what is happening. It's all about providing more choice for people to do what they want, when they want, how they want. I mean, that's what this is. That's what we've seen an acceleration in. It's trends that were happening pre-COVID. It's just accelerated at light speed. It's a bit like we've seen with retail. E-commerce has accelerated 10 years in 10 months. It's the same thing we're seeing now in terms of dynamics behind the industry. So I think those are some of the things that are shifting. Just to finish off the previous question, in terms of what customers are looking for now. I mean, obviously there's a short-term demand for, is the space safe? Is it clean? What protocols have you got in place? Those sorts of things have obviously been important for the last 12 months, particularly for employers who are putting employees into space that they are taking from a landlord, whether it's a flex office provider or I'm sure if it's a landlord direct, is the building and the environment safe to put my people in to work from? We actually saw some immediate demands for more space because you want more distancing. So space has gone to small compact workstations. It's increasing again. So there's a range of things that have initially driven things. But I think what's changing now is if people, are going back to the office at different speeds, it's, well, are my colleagues there and not there? What days are there? How do I collaborate? So there's a lot more challenge around knowing when people are going to be there. I think one of the things technology could maybe enable better is how do you collaborate physically? You used to just go in Monday to Friday, your colleagues are there. Now some are there on Monday, some are there on Friday. How do you meet together? To François' point, if we want to create that culture, we've got to be together with people sometimes again. So how do we make that happen? So those are some of the things that are changing. at the moment.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think on top of the anecdotal data we all hear, why don't we ask Thomas, like, what do we actually see in the data? And at the same time with the audience, I'm going to launch a poll asking actually exactly that. What are the main value adds? So we'll see if they back up your points, Neil. Thomas, why don't we go to you to see kind of what data points are people looking at to make these decisions, and kind of what's important?
Yeah, sure. I think that if we look at it from it, and I think I'd like to just point on like what Neil just mentioned. I think it's there is accelerating trends which puts kind of the tenants on our side. This is the corporate real estate teams into these pressure cookers. Like they are from kind of top down. Everyone now in the C-level has opinions about how the future of work is looking like. But then on the other hand, they of course, cost is one thing, but on the other hand is the employees, the productivity, the experience. And I think that's the balance to strike. And the problem, kind of this balance to find was easy in the past. If you could just say, okay, I have one person equals one desk. These days are definitely gone. I mean, we had already before the pandemic started to work flexibly with activity-based working concepts and so on, which is kind of still focused on one building, but I'm spending 5 days at different locations in one building. Now the complexity is even increasing, that like I'm not spending 5 days per week at the office, but I'm spending it across different work points. And that's kind of the problem on the tenant side. They need to look at a whole set of different data. It's not just the office, it's across different, what we call work points. Can be a third place, co-working space. It can be of course at home and so on. And you want to, as a tenant, understand where are people most happy. And in the end, the data you look at is, of course, the location, meaning utilization. And secondly, it's the satisfaction. So am I happy working at home? Some people, yes, depending on the role, other people not. And this is really what drives the future. I think we're at the point of the kind of the real estate, corporate real estate domain is at a point where digital marketing was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where there was basically no data or just a little data. And today you basically on digital marketing side, you analyze every click and everything, every visit. I think we can apply that to corporate real estate going forward. Corporate real estate needs to become more data driven in order to be human centric in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of what everybody is touching on, and what we also hear from probably what we think and from our friends is looking at the poll, the social and informal interactions with colleagues is so important. And exactly as you say, Thomas, people are asking themselves, are we happy at work? Like, or are we happy at working from home? It's basically coming down to a very personal question of what people actually want and how does work fit into their life, and obviously how the office fits into that. Maybe then a follow-up question.
Maybe just add to, I think there's another thing that we've seen increasingly is, one of the things that's been an unfortunate side effect of working from home has been, the separation between home and work has disappeared. I mean, a lot of people have found their day has stretched, because if everyone knows you're working from home, then you're always available. And so some of the the push or pull to work somewhere other than home, I'm not saying it's necessarily back into a central office, it could even be going to a coffee shop or a local, whatever it is to get some of that sort of separation between work and home back, and try and close your day off at sort of an hour later, where it's sort of, instead of if it was an 8 to 6 or a 9 to 5, whatever, it's extended into as long as you're awake, you're available. And so some of that's been, we're certainly seeing some people just to get some time out, actually going back to the office, ironically, has been given them time out that they'd lost over the last 18 months because they were always permanently available. So that's something we've seen. The other thing that we have seen is coming back into an environment that's got high quality infrastructure, and that's everything from Wi-Fi to soundproofing and all of the things that we've all been on Zoom calls and various other things where the dog runs in, the child runs in, there's someone drilling upstairs. I was in building that the other day, all of those sort of things. And getting back to an environment where you've got a bulletproof work environment that everything works, it's there, it's set up that way. So some of those other things which are not in the poll but are becoming a factor as this has rolled on for 18 months, because you can put up, initially everyone got landed in this at short notice, just get on and work from home, and there was massive adaptability, but it's never been perfect from day one. And I think there's a clawback to better quality working environments, wherever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think maybe then that brings us to our next question. What does the office represent to a company then, and its culture, as we look towards the future? I think there are some companies like Google, for example, where the office is so important. It's part of their perks package. They provide food, they provide massage, they provide dry cleaning, all of these fancy things. To other places where the office is just where you go to work. François, I think Ivanhoe is doing something even with your own headquarters, saying, the art you guys are installing in the lobby, you want the office to be a place that inspires people, that's beautiful. Tell me a little bit about how Ivanhoe Cambridge is looking at your own headquarters, and then kind of how innovation plays into that.
Well, you're right, because what we're saying is the office product will be a lot more fragmented than before. It was getting fragmented, how the type of amenities, the type of service, how you help people, having the neighborhood goods and services, easy access to them, with engagement app and services. So it's becoming a niche product. So we have a product where we have tenants that see office the way we see it too, as a central location, and it's not for everyone. And the type of service that they need is a lot more depth and width than they were asking before, with flex space and also transportation, easy access, even information about parking availabilities, day-to-day reservation, reservation for certain rooms and certain services. But I think that the biggest disruption that might disrupt, and it's in your question, that would also disrupt the workforce and the overall office industry is let's say a company like Google that says, or Facebook, or the big ones, okay, you want to work from home, then where are you working? And then your salary would be aligned to that. If it might be lower, and then if you open that door, that means that company could source anywhere for any type of services in any country. So that will be the biggest disruption, because that's a net loss for office. You could argue that it's going to be, or it might be, the counter effect would be people will need more space. For more physical space, then the net will be, neutral. But if the industry is moving towards having a workforce that is a lot more spread out in the world, that's a disruption for everyone, workers alike and ourselves. So that might be something to look at. And then we need to look at our tenant mix. What kind of industries, how seeing different ways of approaching head office, more spread out. So the discussion about data is not only about usage within our property, but also an industry and a company, and what are their plans for the future, and which industry, in which country, in which city will be affected how. So the risk is on our tenant mix. How do we understand, their vision about the office and how central it is? So this is where we're trying to understand, also adapt the service and our office. So we have many pilots going on in different countries and cities to see how these things work and spread out.
Yeah, absolutely. Freddie, I'll go to you and then Neil afterwards. Building on what François said, how do you guys think about building in kind of flex spaces or alter other third spaces and tying that into the head office and making sure it's a cohesive experience for employees across the board? So Freddie, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Neil.
Yeah, I was very interested by what François was saying, partly because to your point, I come at it from totally the other angle, right? Which is, as an operator of flexible working spaces, I think, if I interpret, I'll come to your question you just asked, but if I interpret your original question as why do people come to the office? Shock, horror, contrarian view, it's not to work. I think this is the sort of obvious error that people have made for a long time, is that somehow work is only possible in an office, and it obviously just isn't true. It hasn't been true for as long as we've had laptops. For most of the time, of course, I understand there are types of work that are better done or only possible in person. But the idea that you can be productive, as I hope we're all being productive here remotely, has been a long time coming. So if people aren't coming to the office to work historically, then what's the office for? Well, I think, and this is maybe a counterpoint to some of the other perspectives you'll hear, but I think typically the office has been seen very much as a, and I know Neil mentioned this, thinking about the customer as obviously the person who's paying the bill, and that's the company, right? And from an institutional standpoint, what does the customer want? What are the sort of structural shifts and so on? But actually, I think what is missed in this conversation is treating the end user as the customer and actually trying to understand, why do we employ all of these people, right? So you employ people because they generate more value than it costs you to have them on the payroll. And actually, the sooner that we can start to realize that helping individuals be productive in whichever way is useful to them, the sooner I think we'll be able to, again, I mentioned it earlier, sort of move this conversation away from what works for the for the kind of employer and actually what the employer thinks they need, which can often be a very sort of top-down perspective, and actually turn it around and apply kind of technology, lean principles of saying, actually, what does a very end user want to be most productive? And if you can be productive outside of a main office, then what is it the main thing that people want from offices? When every survey, if you look at any survey of any kind of workforce for what it is that they want from their employer, way above increased pay, way above more holidays, it's flexibility. It's the ability to manage their life and their work in harmony, rather than something that has to be in competition. So I think, coming now to your question, if people aren't coming to the office to do work, they're coming for other reasons, right? They're coming for, and it was reflected in your poll earlier, cultural engagement, social engagement. Yes, certain types of work that can only be done in the office. Thinking now to kind of how that plays into the sort of post-pandemic world, as this realization I think has now been made that offices in central locations are good some of the time, but not all of the time. I think what we'll see is a blend, and I think we will move from a world of extreme, 100% 5 days in the week, or 100% remote if you're a really kooky tech company, and there's sort of nothing in between, to having a sort of a normal distribution, sort of a bell curve shape, where 2 to 3 days, I think people will be working. I've just been on a whole bunch of customer calls this morning, and this has been the consistent theme. 2 to 3 days near home in a location like Patch, or possibly at home, and then 2 to 3 days in the office, only when they need to be. And as I said before, and I will hammer this drum, I think the sooner that we understand that it's the end user, it's the customer, it's the individual employee who's actually generating value for employers, for the company, and we begin to design workspace environments that allow them to be productive, so the companies will become productive, and so real estate will have to adapt. And I just think for too long it's been the other way around.
I think one of the themes we do see is that people are focusing more on the end user now, and less on the company paying the rent, that you say. Neil, to bring it back a little bit more to the original question, how do you guys make sure at IWG that your flex spaces are, in line with corporate culture and the same experience that people and employees would get going into the head office versus, one of these flex spaces?
Well, I'm not sure what the head office is. We haven't got one, so that's the dynamic. What is the head office? I mean, so there may be a desire to get groups of people together in large numbers or great numbers, but does it have to be in the head office? Historically was this physical building that you went to, and you made the pilgrimage to the head office, and you were indoctrinated by the head office and culture, and that was where everything rested. That's becoming much more distributed now. I mean, you've even got when you see HSBC and people like that ripping out the executive floor and making that. Now there may be an element of showmanship around that, but it's important because it's responding to what happened. I mean, there's obviously financial reasons behind some of what's happening, but there is work pattern shifts. I mean, what people have found in the last 18 months. There's a lot of roles that, to Freddie's point, people picked up their laptop from home, got on a train, went to the centre, went to this head office in the city centre, got the laptop out, put it back, used it, packed it up, went home the same day. And and what's happened in the last 18 months, a lot of those roles, people say, well, look, this is insane. I don't need to do that. It's bad for the planet. it's bad for me personally, it doesn't help my family, I'm saving a lot of cash. So those sort of things, that there are certainly needs for, I mean, there are specific roles, there are specific teams where it is important to get together. A lot of the creative industries where they kind of feed off one another. So there are situations where that's changing. But you know, I think what we see, it's really about providing the maximum amount of flexibility. And what people talk about as disruption to the historic office business, I mean, that's the whole opportunity set for our entire thesis and business. So we don't really care whether you've got 100 people in one office or 100 people in 100 offices. And we've seen a massive shift over the last 18 months, an acceleration of companies for whom historically flexible workspace was an add-on. It was project space, it was swing space when they were moving offices, it was scale up, scale down. It's now gone to core workplace strategy of having flexibility embedded in what they do, partly to take cost out, partly because they've seen some roles don't need to be in very expensive real estate in city centres. Their employees are pushing back against it. A lot of the senior executives don't want to do it either, who are making the decisions. So you've had some top-down decision making on some of this, which you never had before. So there's a range of things at play, but it comes back to what I said at the beginning. It's all about providing convenience, choice is sitting much more in the hands of, you know, in different places from what it was before. And that's really playing to, you know, how do we provide that network of choice for people to choose from, whether it's home, a local office, a central office, it doesn't matter. And it's doing it on a basis that the employer or employee can choose. It doesn't have to be the same 1 or 2 days a week. It doesn't have to be 2 days a week at home, 2 days a week locally, and 1 day. It can be the other way around. 1 week, it can be 5 days. You know, it's providing that ability to do that. And you know, tech's an enabler for that, because you've got to know which offices have availability. How do I get there? Will my colleagues be there at the same time? You know, the collaboration aspect of this is very difficult at the moment. Find a static diary. How do you do that across a team of 10 who's all remote? You don't see them every day. You don't speak to them. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in this for technology. Maybe Thomas can comment where you can bring some of those in to make that reality that people want, I think, and what we're seeing much easier to use, because it's still quite difficult to do some of those things on the technology. And again, Francois, you may see it's quite difficult to do some of these, even in an office that you own and building that you own. It's that if you got people saying, well, how do I know Francois is in there this week and Freddie, and what, you know, without phoning them up and sending lots of emails around and looking at diaries shared, it's quite difficult. Solving some of those things will make it a lot more interesting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see startups in the PropTech space making sure that they're an application that can be built into offices around the world. So for example, we talked to Lane, which is a tenant experience startup. And one of the reasons they've grown internationally is actually quite opportunistic, where, you know, one company says, hey, our headquarters is in New York, but we want our employee, if they're going to the London office, to the Sydney office, the Singapore office, to have the exact same employee experience. So that's actually why they've rolled out so quickly. So then let's go to Thomas. What are you seeing in the space? How will technology be used to kind of contribute to hybrid work in the future and kind of ensure that same employee experience, or even kind of make sure the experience employees are having for the same team? One person is in the office, one person is the flex space, one person is working from home. How are they leveling out that kind of meeting experience or workday experience across the board?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing I quickly wanted to add, I think it's regarding the question, what is the office and why do we need an office? I think from talking to customers, probably the nicest example or analogy I heard is like, the office is like a heart, and your employees are like the blood. And even though if you're not spending 5 days per week in the heart, you're basically from the heart, the office, you get this passion, the energy, and because the office is about the people, right? So you want to go there because you meet the right people. And I think that's a very nice analogy to look at it. The office is like the heart where the passion is created and where like people meet to get stuff done. With regards to your second question, how are employers making sure that the employees across the portfolio encounter the same experience? I think that's exactly the challenge everyone is now experimenting with. So you need to now increase the experience to a way that, okay, if I go to the office, it's worth it. And that's the new value proposition of the office. So the technology is there and that supports the collaboration. And how I look at it, and also like looking at Neil with different third spaces and so on. It doesn't matter where you work, but in the end, what we're actually solving and what an organization needs to solve is what I call the musical chair problem. So employees are like, they can now freely decide where to work from, but it's on the other hand, a problem. Where can I actually, where's the right place and when do I come? And like, to the office, for instance, or to a co-working space. And this is exactly this like musical chair problem, where when the music plays, you're running around. When the music stops, you need to make sure that you have the right work environment where you are productive. And I think that's across the board the problem. And of course, number one is create transparency so that you know how is actually, and this is like the first step, create transparency. How many people do I have across the different work points? How do they feel about? And then you can start implementing that. And it's less, I look at it almost it needs the technology need to be invisible to the end users, in the end to the employees. But in the end, on the backside, there is a huge work that needs to get done by technology. But ideally, employees don't really see anything about it. So they don't need to book or do this and this and this, because that just harms the whole overall experience.
Yeah, François?
To build on the discussion about being user-centric, totally agree. Being employee-centric also, but it's more than that. Also, it's human-centric. As people, we know might go less to the head office, but when they go, it's going to be more important. So I think we might answer more needs, as people being in the building, but also making that we answer their needs as father, as a mother, as friends, as colleagues, as individuals. So anything around wellness, around make it easy, not only at work. We talk about having the remote phone being your remote control of your office life, but also as your life if you decide to take your car, your bike, or transit. It has to be worthwhile. So the idea of the 15-minute city, a building being a way so we could aggregate services in something that it's easy to use and pay for. This is what a business is. You aggregate or disaggregate, you make it easy for access. So the type of services that we need to give people access to very easily is a lot broader than before. So it's human, not workers. At the end of the day, but that's the hard thing to do.
I'd really like to vigorously agree with what François has just said. This human-centric versus office-centric world. I mean, if you were just to imagine, kind of, it's a bit of a big idea, but if you imagine the sum total of all human potential, just for one moment, if you were to imagine that, 7, 8 billion, how many people are on the planet right now, were all working to their absolute maximum potential, and that they were all doing it in a way that worked around their existing lives, right? Do you think that would be in an office, right? Do you think that maximum human potential to be realized would be putting everyone into a cube 5 days a week, an hour away from where they live? And then if that's 100%, where are we now? Where are we actually on that kind of potential? So we are just at the beginning of this, I think, revolution in kind of human productivity and matching opportunity to talent based on who they are, not where they live, not whether or not they have caring responsibilities, not whether or not they may have access challenges or whatever, but actually beginning to understand that human capital, human potential, human capability needs to be served better if we're going to get more out of the sort of collective human brain. And the fact that we have designed basically around factories and then sort of shoved that format onto everyone and said, right, there you go, that's the answer, is, when we look back in 100 years, we just seem absolutely crazy.
But I agree that office can answer all needs, and home either can be the perfect place to do any type of work that people need to do.
Yeah, it's one of many, there's a constellation of different talent types and different, productivity suites and needs and so on. But we have, to this point, only really had one solution. And so actually, the sooner we can begin to match the right solution to the right type of scenario for each individual person, I mean, the sooner we can get close to unlocking all of that potential.
Just to pick up on something François mentioned, the 15-minute city. This is something that we also talk about in our new white paper, which was in partnership with IWG, kind of about this 15-minute city and kind of why it's so popular right now. Neil, can I go to you to just kind of get IWG's point of view of why the 15-minute city now is kind of the hot topic?
Well, I mean, a big part of it's just, sustainability, and well, I mean, it's back to what I said. People have had a lot of time back, and the commuter worker has had a lot of time back and a lot of money back, and a lot of more family time as a consequence. And the fear factor that some governments have understandably pushed through as a result of the COVID pandemic is sort of people are more reticent about public transport. So if you can walk or bike or drive directly to something that's closer to home and less interaction with people, but essentially from our perspective, it's good for it's a positive thing. If you're not, commuting just generates a lot of carbon, right? And so I think that's playing more strongly as a theme. So I think that is it. But it's along with you're saving more money and you're saving more time and you're good for the planet. So it's good for people, it's good for, and you've got happier employees. So it's kind of good for people, it's good for the companies they're working with, it's good for the planet. So it's kind of, that's really what's driving, I think, a lot of the discussion around it, essentially. I think those are the key
absolutely. Turning the conversation now a little bit more futuristic looking, let me throw it out to all the panelists. What technology do you wish existed but doesn't yet in terms of office or work in general? I'll give everybody a second to think about it. And if anybody wants to kick us off, I think I can start. I think my personal one is, for example, when you are working in a kind of open plan space, you have a row of desks, even if you're socially distanced, you can still hear somebody else's conversation. In my kind of Jetson type of future world, I wish there was a button you could press for, your desk space, and a bubble would appear and then your conversations would be silent. So almost as if you're going into a phone booth, but at the press of a button and not in a small tiny hot pod of sorts. So I think if there was one kind of dream technology that I wish they could have in the office right now, that would be mine.
I don't know if this is one technology or this is a sort of unformed thought, but there's definitely a sort of completeness or simplicity of payment stack that just doesn't exist. Shopify for property. There's so many steps and layers in between the ultimately the landlord and the consumer at the other end, and it's incredibly. I mean, I'm very new to the property industry, and it is shocking to me actually just how difficult it is to make a payment, and the amount of steps that money has to go through to go from I own this space to I'm using this space. So. But some sort of instant payment stack, Shopify for property would probably be my answer.
Do you mean something with, sorry, just to clarify, do you mean something with like blockchain and tokenization, or do you mean something else?
No, I think there is a role for blockchain, but it's not in payments in this context. I mean, if you want to buy something from a shop, like consider your purchase experience on Amazon to your purchase experience for a rental. To renting a piece of property. Think about how many steps you've got to go through and how instant that is. And actually, there's just as many steps for your piece of, your toothbrush that comes to you from Amazon. You go all the way back to the supplier and all the sort of intermediaries and the carriers and the shipping and the payment gateways and all the rest of it. And there's an immense amount that's got to happen. That pound has got to go to a lot of people in a lot of places very, very quickly. But if I want to rent space, and as I said, it's not exactly one technology, it's more of a stack. The contracts, the immediacy, the payment, like the complexity of the length of time that it takes. As I said, it's a slightly vague thought, but let's say a patch customer comes into a patch and they want to pay. Again, like it just takes a very long time to get. It's just about enough front end stuff, I think, to take their cash. But even then, like. It's just not as quick or as this. I mean, invoicing. I'm sure Neil can explain how challenging invoicing is in this kind of industry. So yeah, not a fully formed thought, but there's certainly something about the immediacy of payments and the contracts related.
I think there's some elements that are there, but in some respects, it's like when e-commerce started, you thought you were having an end-to-end tech solution, but actually. There was, an order came in, it was printed off, someone ran to, it's kind of. This industry is to some extent still at that point. So, but we we can book things like if it's a meeting room or a short stay or a co-working, we can book that end-to-end online, confirm it, pay for it now. It's when you get into more complex office product with this customization or a tour or it's a bigger spend, that's when you get into the invoicing chat. You know, it's just it's not got to a sort of ubiquitous sort of sales proposition in the way that other things have. And give you an example, if you book a hotel room, I want to go and stay in a Hilton or a Four Seasons or whatever your brand of choice is, you don't question, you're immediately banking on the brand equity delivering exactly what you expect when you go to a Marriott or a Hilton, that you don't have to see the room. I mean, you can all these technologies, you can see the room now, but you don't have to. You kind of saying, oh, it'll be good. It's this brand, I like it, always delivers. This industry hasn't delivered that customer outcome yet. I mean, we are trying to do it. We do it better in some of our brands than others. I mean, there's obviously a long 30-year history but you know, if you come into the Spaces, you're pretty clear on what you get in the Spaces. You know what it looks like, what the rooms look like. You're much more comfortable. I'll book a room there, I know what it's like. But it's just making it much more consumable, I think, is the point you make the case, Freddie, and then you can automate the payment behind it on any of the payment platforms out there. But it's not there yet. But there are steps in the right direction, I think happening. Coming back to your question, Therese, on technology, I was talking to a colleague the other day who sort of got me thinking on this topic, and you know, I think it's again partly the background of how do you get sort of choice of where you work and collaboration with colleagues. Maybe it's something around the sort of, and the technology's there, but it's very poor at the moment, augmented reality, where you're kind of actually in your office, but you're not in your office. You're kind of virtually in your office, and it's not some pastiche of that, or it's very, but now technology and computing works, and you're not wearing an Oculus head or whatever the brand is of headset. It's something that's a pair of glass like François is wearing, for example, now. That's kind of, it's not something you have to think about. You just flick it on, and you're actually in your office with your colleagues who may actually physically be there. Somewhere that you're blending that virtual construct and collaboration together, so you can work where you want, but you can actually be with colleagues. I think you know, that's probably something I think we'll see more of. But that could help sort of maybe merge the sort of disconnect of people and culture with choice on where you want to be working.
There's a very fun version of this. It's not quite the sort of exact virtual reality that you described, Neil, but there's a very fun version. It's called Cosmos. It allows you to move around little characters on a sort of Game Boy style screen, and it's extremely effective. And when you walk into, you know, an immediate environment, some little video pops up and you're straight into a video conversation. So it kind of blends gaming with that kind of gaming atmosphere and environment with actual interaction, and it's unbelievably effective at recreating the in-office experience.
Now, Thomas?
Yeah, I think my point here, I think it's if I look back also in the last 18 months, I think what was really great is, and it goes to your point, Teresa, what was really great, and I was never so effective in just like scheduling meeting after meeting, not going from one meeting room into the other. And it was just really like going through, but of course, missing this human interaction. And I think it's really this, if I could have one wish, just like teleport myself, because I think, people first, we want to see. I mean, I would love to just see you guys and not look into a screen right now. So I think if we could just be in one room with now 37 people, I think that would be a whole different thing. And I think if that's one thing I could wish for, like exactly this thing where you can just like, okay, I can actually just sit on this thing. It removes my commute. It moves my flights and everything. I think it's really this teleportation thing. That's the one thing from the pandemic. But the other thing, which I'm thinking about quite a lot, is like, there's so much friction during our day. So how we use our devices, and we are like, the technology is very much at the forefront. And somehow this needs to be at the back, and like this friction needs to be removed so that we can interact with each other without struggling to unmute and so on and so forth. This should just be done by some sort of intelligence that takes care of it. And we can take care of having creative thoughts and discussing and brainstorming, and not to worry, I need to connect here and then I need to do this and this. we struggle a lot with the technology and it's not yet there. If we can somehow remove all of this friction, I think we are more productive and more creative. We create greater idea. We can turn the humankind's biggest challenge we can turn into opportunities. But it's still like, yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know how many links I clicked to get into this call. It's just way too complicated.
François?
I had the same wish, if everyone could be together at the press button, we would have a totally different discussion about space and where we want to do things. And the good thing I think I see, it's not about technology, it's about perception and how we see things differently now than before. Remember, before the little pandemic, when you had more than 30% of flex office in your building, you lose value. So because valuators thinks that you don't have large 90% occupancy, 99 with lease of 20 years, as hotels have been doing it differently, day by day for the last 100 years. So that shift has to happen because real estate, I'm new in real estate, it's been less than 2 years, but when we say that real estate was slow to include technology, I think people are not stupid. First, it's hard to do, to link all these things together. And then it was hard to see what's the value that it creates for everyone and also the building itself. But now the question of not doing it, most people know that it will affect value. So that will fast track, PropTech investment and then adoptions, but it's still very hard. But at the end of the day, there's that shift of being comfortable that an asset still has value, even if it has different types of lease on a click, for an hour, for a day, but we're not there yet. There's
some of that goes to just there's a financing problem behind it, highly correlated to that. The banks want to lend against it. They say, well, I want a 10-year. If you want a 5-year, I want leases beyond that, and that's not the consumable model that customers and people want today. They don't want that, and so landlords are pegged to providing that because otherwise they can't get financing, in which case the returns go down. But you're right. There was a sort of view on, is flex accretive or not to the value of the building. Now, we would argue that actually it's becoming more important for landlords to be able to offer flex, whether they do that with themselves or with someone like us, doesn't matter. But we would certainly argue that it's becoming a more important decision factor for tenants going into building in a conventional way, that there is flex capability within the building, which should be, and without it, the building's worth less. But the conventional leasing model, which the real estate industry has enjoyed a sort of an asymmetric benefit for forever, has to change because we're obviously seeing that environment now. Whether that's structurally forever, who knows? But it's certainly at this point in time there's a need to adapt that because people aren't signing up to those anymore. But it does go back. But you've got all these loans out there against all these buildings financed in that way, and it's a structural problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for example, coming from a hospitality real estate background, hospitality was always looked at as a bit of a hedge against other types of real estate, just because of that every night pricing, right? So if something happened, you could increase, decrease easily. And we could see that move towards office, especially as, higher percentages of buildings become flex. Office can almost be a kind of similar hedge, or even a hedge against the kind of longer tenure terms as well.
But as we've seen in that pandemic, I mean, the models is hotels nighttime and offices daytime. And in a flex model, a flex model essentially is doing exactly what it's just fractionalizing space on shorter term. So it's, you don't finance a hotel based on people staying for average stay 2 nights in the industry. No one's financing hotels on average stay 2 nights. They think it's a great business. Now it's gone from 100, high occupancy, lost 90% of revenue business instantly, which is what's happened. So whereas we've seen, our contract length on average has been sort of 12 because people are coming inside the 1 year, but we've got average stay that's much longer. So the revenues have come off significantly less. So it's a shallower dip in recovery. We've seen this in previous economic crises. In the hotel industry, it happens, it's catastrophic and it's immediate. There's no, you don't wait a week. It's sort of airlines aren't flying, the occupancy is all gone immediately because people aren't. And so it's amusing to see the way finance providers look at the two industries very differently. It's much easier to get money for a hotel than it is for a flexible office. But the risk profile, I would argue, is higher risk given those systemic shocks that are instantaneous. I mean, I was in hospitality for 5 years, and it's a much more complicated business. You've got a lot of F&B, a lot more staff, a whole host of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. We have just 5 minutes left, so why don't we do a quick lightning round of a kind of last question. Where do you see the future of work in 2040? I think my personal opinion is that it's kind of what Freddie was saying before. I think the gaming industry is a very interesting one to look at towards the future, just because I think their experience in terms of graphics and UX is so high. I think, for example, if you talk to probably a lot of teenage boys during the pandemic, they didn't even realize they weren't socializing with friends as much because they're kind of used to being in Twitch or in the Fortnite universe and just experience their friendships in that way. For them, being in that alter universe is very real. It is actually friendship. There is no replacement for human contact. Or you see Fortnite now doing concerts in there and people attending these concerts as if they're live concerts. So my personal view is that we're probably moving in that direction and kind of, light years behind gaming in that sense. But I think that experience and user need is heading in that direction. Does somebody want to go next? I'll
just follow you because I totally agree. I mean, that's my belief as well. In 2040, the graduates of today who have, to previous points, haven't actually worked in an office with other people yet for obvious reasons, and also the sort of Twitch generation and the TikTok generation, they'll be 40, right? So they'll be running the economy. And for that generation, the idea of congregating in offices doesn't really make any sense. So I think the idea that we'll be congregating in physical spaces and that we can't do most of what we already do today virtually will just be crazy. So it'll be a lot more online. I think we are only at the tip of the iceberg of things that people think can be done remotely. This can't be done remotely. This can't be done remotely. This can't be done remotely, and all those dominoes will fall.
Absolutely. Thomas?
I think so. In 2040, I think work will be very fluid, and I think it's I'm absolutely in line with what Freddie just said. It's just now we start to explore to work from anywhere. We're just scratching the surface, but I think the big thing is then work anytime. So basically asynchronously, and I think that will also allow to really access a global talent pool. And this will open up huge new opportunities. So if you can work anywhere and anytime, probably not all roles from the beginning, but I think this is really at the forefront. And I think for the built environment, I mean, work needs to get done somewhere. I mean, we're humans after all. Yeah, I think the built environment, it will be a blend of like the physical and the virtual world we are as humans spending. But I think what we will see more and more that the physical boundaries of organizations will be teared down. So that like I spend my time together with people in a building where other people are in at the same time. I think that will lead to a fundamental shift in also how the real estate industry works. And that's very much the flexibility is increasing, and tenants will no longer they will pay for only the space they use and so on. I think that's the huge thing that needs to follow suit if we start working, like if work from anywhere and anytime is mainstream.
Great. Neil?
Got an easy question. Look, I think where people will work are working will be more distributed. I don't know. I mean, in geographical terms, I don't know whether it'll, what format will be in. Who knows? I mean, there'll be new industries in 2040 that, if we look back 20 years, I mean, and I look at my kids going through, there's roles, jobs, industries that didn't exist. I mean, weren't even a concept 20 years ago that have taken over a lot of work that people were actively engaged in 20 years ago. So that's going to change. I think the industries and roles and what people are doing will change, and that will change by default. Office in the historic context may reduce as a category. I mean, I think there's already a lot of technologies out there that are allowing automation of what were office activities that are being automated by machines now because they're running 24/7. And so I think I think all I can say, I think work will be more distributed geographically. It's going to, you've seen this move from the countryside to the city side as the world's gone to over 50%, urban population. So I suspect it may be go back the other way. We're already seeing an acceleration of that just after 18 months of remote working. We're seeing an acceleration of people go back. You can see that by property prices as they've accelerated out of towns and cities in country locations. That's where on the hospitality side you're seeing demand. It's not city centre grand hotels at the moment. It's resorts in the wilderness, and it's those sorts of things. So I think it will just be more remote because people are going to be able to work more remotely in better ways. And I do think some of the technologies that will help enable that to happen faster. But I think there's going to be a whole new range of industries and things, and people are doing differently. Having said that, I still think cities are going to be an important part of the future. I mean, they have been throughout history, and I think they still will be, as whether it's more cultural than work, or they've been highly adaptable. Some of the best cities in the world have adapted themselves from manufacturing cities to service cities to cultural cities to. So I think that will still happen.
And lastly, Francois?
I think it just might be different.
Along the same lines, I think we're going to spend probably more time bringing work to people rather than people to work. So the highly distributed workforce, many languages, asynchronous work will be, the thing of the present for many companies. But it's scary in some ways, because then your competition as an employee is the whole world. It is today, but it's going to become that very tangibly as technology enables anyone to work not from downtown to suburbs. It's going to be downtown to the world. So that's another ballgame. What it says to institutionalized owner of office, that means, of course, you might have less, but the flight to quality is going to be there for people. That is important to have a place where you could not only have performance, but also grow as a human.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys.
This is why people are going to city, is to aggregate and do commerce together, and that will still happen. Since the beginning of the world, it will. Hopefully, we won't be humans in our computers all over the world working together. It's a sad world. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, that's our hour up. I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists and also to all of our attendees for listening in today. It was a great discussion. I think that the clear answer is that there is no one answer, but we are working more towards a distributed workforce, and hopefully people will live happier and more fulfilled lives, and work will fit into that. Great. Thank you guys so much again.
Thanks.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.